Overnight, the head of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, warned about an apocalyptic global food shortage. And food security and energy security are absolutely linked. In Australia, the energy billionaire Trevor St Barker made a big intervention today, calling out the empty rhetoric of both major parties and urging against the early closure of our coal-powered power plants, electricity plants. He says you shut them down early, you'll drive up electricity prices and make it harder to keep the lights on. Well, these two people know all about that. Coming from the Gunnedah Shire, former Deputy Prime Minister John Anderson, and from Adelaide, columnist for The Australian, Dr Jennifer Oriel. Well, it's the bleeding obvious, John, I know, but we've been talking about this for months and months and months. But if these Teal independents get up, the price of their vote for Anthony Albanese, at the very least, will be shutting down all of these things early. And Trevor St John says, well, don't expect the same standard of living.
This is really the battle that we now have right across the West between thinking and feeling. And what is amazing is that it takes practical people to point to hard-nosed realities, but so many educated people, it seems, sadly, and their candidates, including the Teals, run on feelings. Fact one, Australia is only 1.1%, 1.2% of global emissions, but the polls show that Australians think we're responsible between 10 and 20. Fact two, former Chief Scientist Alan Finkel said you could shut Australia down and it would make very little difference. Fact three, if we cripple our economy now, if we lose out to the wave of autocracy and the unsettlement that not being able to feed people of genuine food crisis, and we need fossil fuel to feed people, a lot of it, including gas, then the last thing I can tell you we'll be arguing about is whether Australia can save the planet. It's thinking versus feeling, and it's time people who have strings of degrees after their names did a little more thinking, including about what some of their policies might mean for ordinary, decent, everyday Australians.
We've never been more educated, Jennifer Oriel, but we've never been more dumb.
Well, there's a lot of miseducation going on, I think it's fair to say. And we know now more than ever that it's really important to have a slow transition to renewable energy and a slow transition to net zero, which is what the coalition is proposing. There are arguments against that still, but I think it is inevitable now, and most people accept that it's inevitable. We will be going to a significant reduction in carbon emissions in the near future. But the transition timing is really important. Larry Fink, who's one of the great green investors in the world, warned that the West would be heading towards inflation and very high petrol prices. He warned about this last year, and he said, you've got to be realistic about the prospect of greenflation, which is going to push prices up even higher. Now, we're seeing already the effects of inflation just starting to happen in Australia. There have been numerous rate rises in the US. We need to think about being decent to hardworking Australians who cannot afford what the Green voters and inner city voters can afford, and all of the people who stand to lose their jobs if there is a real rush to renewables and net zero, as the independents and the Greens are proposing. So this is about a moral conscience, taking a moral decision, and also a realistic one to not make Australians more vulnerable and to not make us more vulnerable in the world, as John said, to the march of autocrats.